My name is Agatha Mervin. I'm 65 years old, a widow for nearly a decade, and today I put on the dress my husband Harold always said made me look like royalty. Navy blue silk with pleats that swished just so when I walked. It still smelled faintly of cedar and memory. I wore it to my grandson Guzman's wedding because I wanted Harold to be with me in spirit, to see the boy we'd helped raise begin his new life. I woke early that morning, ironed the dress, pressed my hair into its familiar neat waves, applied a soft dab of the perfume Harold gave me on our last Christmas together. I told myself I would not cry today, that today would be a celebration. I had paid for everything from the flowers to the string quartet, but it was love, not money, that brought me here. The ceremony was held at a picturesque vineyard in the hills. Guzman looked handsome, so full of youth and promise. Callie, his bride, was beautiful in a fitted gown of ivory lace. They said their vows under an arch of roses I had paid for. Guests smiled, snapped photos, dabbed at the corners of their eyes. I smiled too, a quiet pride blooming in my chest. Afterward, we walked to the reception hall. The air was sweet with the scent of hydrangeas and lavender. Laughter echoed off the high beams of the oak ceiling ballroom. At the check-in table, a young woman, no older than 20, was distributing name tags. "Here you go, ma'am," she said with a cheerful nod, handing me mine. I expected it to say Agatha Mervin, grandmother of the groom. Something simple, something respectful. Instead, in swirling calligraphy, it read, "The old lady who will pay for everything here." I blinked, thought maybe I was seeing it wrong. But no, that's exactly what it said. "Is this some kind of mistake?" I asked softly. The young woman hesitated. All the name tags were submitted by the wedding planner. I think they were meant to be cute. Cute. That word echoed like a slap. Before I could say another word, I heard laughter to my left. My son Roger and his wife Pamela stood together, holding champagne flutes and laughing like teenagers. "Oh, Mom, don't make that face," Roger said, chuckling. "It's just a joke. Lighten up a little." Pamela added, "It's not like it's untrue. You did pay for everything. We just wanted to acknowledge your contribution." I felt my cheeks heat with shame, but I said nothing. Instead, I pinned the tag to my dress, my hands trembling ever so slightly. I walked into the ballroom, the music and chatter swallowing me whole. Everywhere I turned, there were reminders. The 5-tier cake, each layer more extravagant than the last, paid for by me. The calligraphy menus with filet mignon or wild mushroom risotto, paid for by me. The champagne flowing like water, paid for by me. And yet, not once did anyone say, "Thank you, Agatha." Not once did anyone call me by name. Not even Guzman, my sweet boy who once called me his best friend. He was too busy dancing, smiling for photos, and shaking hands with Callie's relatives, most of whom had only arrived on the scene in the last 2 years. During cocktail hour, I stood alone at the edge of the crowd, sipping a sparkling water and pretending not to hear. "She's basically their ATM," one woman whispered to her husband. "Oh, Pamela said she was more than happy to pay," another voice replied. She insisted. I hadn't insisted. I'd been asked. And I'd said yes, because that's what family meant to me. I wandered over to the bar, needing something stronger than sparkling water. That's when I saw the table, my assigned seat. It wasn't at the family table where Callie's parents and aunts were seated. No, I was at table 9, in the corner, near the service doors, with a tag that said, "Table for the old lady who pays." I sank into my chair, heart pounding with quiet humiliation. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't ask to be moved. I sat, smiled, nodded politely at strangers. I've survived worse. I buried my husband. I raised a son while working 2 jobs. I rebuilt my life from the ground up after cancer stole a piece of me and Harold never saw. And I'd survive this too. Midway through dinner, the toasts began. Guzman took the mic, standing tall and flushed with love and champagne. Callie beamed beside him. "I want to thank everyone who came today," Guzman began. "Especially my incredible parents, Dad, Mom, you made all of this possible." He raised his glass to Roger and Pamela, who stood and bowed playfully. And of course, he added, a very special thank you to my grandmother. She's the reason the bar hasn't run dry tonight. Laughter rippled through the room. I smiled tightly. No, seriously, Guzman went on. Grandma Agatha, wherever you are, we love you. We owe you. Big time. People clapped. But they didn't look at me. They looked through me. I touched the envelope inside my clutch. It was small, white, sealed with a red wax stamp. Inside was something I hadn't told anyone about. Something Harold and I had discussed, planned, and just before his passing, finalized. I wasn't ready to give it just yet. Not now. Not tonight. Not while the room still buzzed with the giddy glow of jokes made at my expense. I smiled as they toasted, clinked glasses, posed for pictures, and laughed. But inside, I was already planning. Not a scene. Not revenge. Something quieter. Stronger. Permanent. Because before the night was over, or perhaps the day after, my family would learn just how expensive a name tag can truly be. The room had transformed since the first glass was poured. Candlelight flickered on the gold-rimmed plates. The orchestra had shifted from sonatas to swing, and laughter now rang louder than clinking silverware. Somewhere, someone knocked over a glass. Someone else applauded. A distant cousin twirled on the dance floor with a bridesmaid he'd only just met. But I sat still at table 9, my spine straight and my smile stiff as porcelain. That name tag still clung to the left side of my chest like a scarlet letter. The old lady who will pay for everything here. I should have torn it off. I should have marched to the microphone and demanded the respect I had rightfully earned. But I had been raised to value dignity over spectacle, to wait, to listen, to let others reveal themselves unprovoked. I had nearly mastered the art of invisibility when I felt a shadow fall across my table. I looked up. Agatha, she said. It took me a moment to recognize her, not because I didn't know her face, but because it was so rare to see it softened by concern. My mother, Eleanor Norwood Miller. At 91, she looked like she'd walked out of an oil painting. Her garnet silk dress shimmered with every slow, deliberate step. The raven-shaped brooch on her collar gleamed under the ballroom's chandeliers, and her cane, polished walnut with a silver tip, clicked against the floor like punctuation. Walk with me. It wasn't a question. I rose, smoothing my dress, and followed her out onto the veranda. The vineyard stretched before us, rows upon rows of grapevines fading into the indigo dusk. Crickets hummed. The stars, faint but beginning, blinked above the hills. I could still hear the faint sounds of jazz behind the closed doors, but out here, it felt like a different world entirely. She said nothing for a while. Then, quietly, I saw the tag. I swallowed. It was meant to be a joke. She turned to me, her eyes sharp, intelligent. And war is just spirited conversation with explosives. I chuckled despite myself. That's dramatic, even for you. Her gaze did not soften. What they did, Agatha, was branding. They reduced your role to a financial transaction. You built this family. You funded this wedding. And they stamped your forehead like cattle at auction. She reached into her beaded clutch and retrieved a folded piece of pale blue paper. I spoke with Harold's lawyer, she said. And then mine. I frowned. Mother, I've added an addendum to my will, she interrupted. Effective immediately. I took the paper from her hands and opened it. The words swam before me, legal language, neatly typed, signed, and notarized. It was real. She looked out over the vineyard, her voice steady. Any heir of mine, child, grandchild, spouse, who humiliates you or me in public forfeits their share of my estate. I made it broad, intentionally. Disrespect has many forms, and I intend to be thorough. I stared at her. Why no? Her mouth twisted into something between a smile and a sneer. Because I'm old. Because I won't be here much longer. And because I want to die knowing my bloodline can't buy my forgiveness with charm and pearls. I looked down at the paper again. This will make them afraid. No, she said. It will make them careful. And perhaps, just perhaps, it will make them kind. At least to you. She took the paper back, folded it precisely, and tucked it into her clutch. You don't need to tell them yet, she added. I don't want fear to be the reason they kiss your cheek. I want to see who they are when they think no one's watching. Observe, Agatha. Let them keep dancing. Let them keep revealing. I thought of Harold, of how he used to hum old standards while watering the hydrangeas, of how he insisted we host every Thanksgiving, even when our knees ached and the kids had other plans. I thought of the way he would grip my hand under the table when Roger started talking too fast and forgetting to listen. Harold had left me control of everything when he passed: the house, the accounts, the investments, the trust fund for Guzman that I administered. But he had made me promise no threats, no ultimatums. I want them to treat you right because they love you, he had said, not because they're afraid you'll pull the rug out from under them. And I had honored that. Until tonight. I brought an envelope, I told her softly. I haven't given it to Guzman yet. I thought about it when he gave his toast, when he called me the bar tab with a brooch. But I kept it in my purse. She smiled. Good. What if it's never enough? I whispered. What if they'll never see me as anything but a wallet with memories? She placed her hand gently over mine. Then you'll see who truly belongs to you, and who only borrowed your kindness. We stood in silence for a while. Then she turned. I need to sit. My legs aren't what they used to be. I opened the door for her, and she stepped back into the noise and wine and glitter. I lingered on the veranda a little longer. Inside, Pamela was taking selfies with the cake. Roger was talking business with a man in cufflinks I didn't recognize. Kelly was already out of her heels and dancing barefoot. Guzman laughed with his college friends near the open bar. Not one of them noticed my absence. I returned to my seat at table 9 and placed my clutch, heavy with Harold's envelope and Eleanor's claws, on my lap. I would not speak tonight. I would not warn. I would watch. And one by one, they would show me who they were. The morning after the wedding, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at my untouched cup of Earl Grey. The steam had long since faded, leaving the scent of bergamot and bitterness in the air. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it accuses. I hadn't slept. Not really. I drifted in and out, haunted by laughter, by clinking glasses, by the echo of Guzman's voice calling me the one who kept the bar open, by the memory of my name tag, still pinned to the silk of my late husband's favorite dress, now draped across a chair like a ghost that hadn't made it home. The old lady who will pay for everything here. It had been meant as a joke, they said. But what kind of joke reduces a lifetime of love, sacrifice, and care to an open wallet? I stood slowly and walked to the hallway closet. I hadn't opened the top shelf drawer in years, not since Harold died. It held financial records, tax returns, statements, and the remnants of my generosity, the kind of generosity that's encouraged in mothers, praised in grandmothers, and quietly devoured by ungrateful mouths. I dragged the box labeled Family Finance into the living room and sat on the rug like a schoolgirl sorting through old report cards. The lid gave a soft crack as it opened. Inside were folders labeled in Harold's neat hand: home repairs, medical, education, travel, gifts, miscellaneous. I chose miscellaneous first. It was never miscellaneous. It was always the most telling. Inside were handwritten checks, copies of transfers, emails with subject lines like "quick favor" and "just this once." Notes in my own handwriting. $4,500 for Pamela's surgery copay, March. $2,800 for new roof leak, August. $5,000 gift for Matilda's ballet intensive. Did I ever see photos? I moved on to education. A crisp white folder filled with tuition payments, tutoring invoices, and deposits to future education funds that somehow never materialized into savings statements. There were receipts for textbooks, laptops, and even a $6,700 payment to a learning coach whose Instagram showed her vacationing in the Maldives during the school year. Travel was worse. A dozen separate entries: $2,000 for Roger and Pamela's anniversary trip to Napa, $3,800 for a cruise the kids begged for, $1,900 for a family ski lodge that I wasn't invited to, though I paid for the lift passes. As I dug deeper, a sickening weight grew in my stomach. A pattern emerged: small requests wrapped in words like need, urgent, and just for the kids. And I had said yes. Every time. Why? Because I love them. Because I thought I was helping. Because when you've spent your life as the glue that holds a family together, you forget that glue is never celebrated, just expected. 3 hours later, I had sorted, categorized, and added $153,842.71. $153,842.71. Used to help the family. Used to fund trips, remodel kitchens, finance hobbies, hire consultants by silence. It wasn't just money. It was time. It was trust. It was belief. And they had spent it all. And now I remembered, like a slap to the face, what Pamela had said just a week ago, right here in this very kitchen, sipping the tea I brewed for her with the good china. You know, Agatha, it might be time to think about downsizing. The house is so big. You could find a lovely condo closer to town. Fewer stairs. Better lighting. We could help you sell. You'd make a killing in this market. She had smiled when she said it, tucked her hair behind her ear like she was doing me a favor. Roger had chimed in, "We're not trying to pressure you, Mom. Just thinking of your comfort. And it could be such a nice little reset for you." A reset. They wanted me to reset my entire life so they could inherit it early. I remembered the photos Pamela had shown me on her phone: open concept kitchens, sunken living rooms, sleek modern bathrooms. She had said they were for inspiration, but I saw now those were plans. My plans, my blueprints, my future erased. They wanted my house. The house Harold and I had poured our souls into. The garden he planted with his own hands. The creaky floorboard in the hallway that made us laugh. The wallpaper I hung with Roger when he was still in braces and liked poetry. The guest room where I'd rocked Guzman to sleep when he had nightmares about monsters. They wanted to gut it, flip it, sell it. I stood, lightheaded, and walked into the study. I opened Harold's old roll-top desk, his fortress of solitude and order. In the top drawer was the small compartment he once told me only to open when it mattered. I still wore the key around my neck. Inside was his black leather-bound notebook, his private ledger. I flipped it open, past the lists of dividend yields and estate valuations, until I found a note written in his familiar, careful script. The trust is fully discretionary. You control everything. Guzman's inheritance is yours to withhold or release. Use it when he becomes a man, not just when he turns 21. You'll know the difference. Love always, H. I traced the letters with my finger, the ink slightly faded, but the intent clear. Harold had seen this coming. He had loved them too, in his way. But he knew. He knew that one day I might be standing exactly where I stood now, alone, surrounded by paper, by proof, by betrayal. And he had left me power not to punish, but to protect. I put the notebook back and sat on the edge of the desk, staring at nothing. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I thought about calling Roger, about confronting him. But no, not yet. First, I would give them the gift of opportunity, to show who they really were. Because I wasn't angry. Not yet. But I had stopped being blind. And that, I had learned, is the first step toward being very dangerous. It was just after noon, and the August light streamed lazily through the lace curtains in the sitting room, casting shadows on the hardwood floor like memories trying to settle. I had just come in from the garden, Harold's garden. The roses were finally blooming with their characteristic defiance, crimson and fuchsia, petals unfolding like secrets that refused to die. I sat in the armchair near the window, sipping tepid tea, the newspaper folded beside me, unread. My thoughts had been drifting all morning. Drifting back to that wedding, that name tag, the laughter that had followed like confetti at a parade thrown in my dishonor. The old lady who will pay for everything here. The phrase still echoed in my head. The humiliation wasn't the worst part. It was the certainty that no one thought I would push back, that I wouldn't fight, that I had been boxed up in their minds, labeled and filed under harmless. I was lost in those thoughts when it happened. 3 deliberate knocks on the front door. No doorbell, no call ahead, just the solid, old-fashioned knock of someone who hadn't come to play. I stood slowly, the ache in my knees reminding me of the hours I'd spent on them planting tulips last spring. I opened the door, half expecting a solicitor or worse, Roger. Instead, it was Mia. Mia, I said, blinking in surprise. Hi, Grandma. She was holding a brown paper bag in one hand and her paint-stained tote in the other. Her curls were tied back with a faded scarf, and her cheeks were pink from the heat or nerves, maybe both. She wore overalls and a t-shirt that read, "Create something honest today." I stepped aside wordlessly, and she entered with the grace of someone raised on my hardwood floors. I brought lemon scones, she said, placing the bag on the kitchen counter. From that little place on Prescott. You always said they didn't ruin them with icing. I offered her a faint smile. You remembered. Of course I did. We sat at the old oak table. She poured the tea with the same ritual I had taught her at 13, when she would stay with me for days at a time while her parents sorted things out. She had always been more daughter than granddaughter to me, the only one who ever looked at me and truly saw me. I wanted to come sooner, she said, eyes downcast. You didn't owe me anything. I think I did. She looked up, and I saw something stirring beneath the surface, something brittle and burning. Shame, fear, love. I saw the name tag, she said softly. I thought maybe it was some mistake. But then I heard them laughing. My stomach tightened. Your parents. She nodded. By the catering tent. They didn't see me. They were drinking champagne, bragging about how on brand the tag was. Mom called it edgy. Dad said it was effective. I swallowed the rising heat in my chest. They also talked about this house, Mia continued. They're already planning. Like it's done. Like you're out of the picture. I said nothing. They want to sell it, she whispered. I heard them talking about knocking out the kitchen wall, putting in modern lines. They said you wouldn't resist long once they showed you the brochures. My voice came out colder than I meant. What brochures? Senior communities, she said, with pools and game rooms. Mom said something about controlled access and monitored medication. Like you're a risk. I stared at her, then out the window at Harold's roses. They don't see the roses, I murmured. Only the dirt they can profit from. Mia reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. You're not a burden, Grandma. You never have been. Her eyes brimmed, but she didn't cry. Nor did I. We simply held that moment between us, tender and brimming with an old, unsaid truth. I'm not like them, she said after a long pause. I've never wanted to be. You're not, I replied. And I think you've always known that. She nodded. I don't want to watch from the sidelines anymore. I want to help. I studied her carefully. So much of Pamela lived in Mia's face, the same smile, the same high cheeks, but none of the manipulation. Mia's honesty had always unnerved her parents. They called her too sensitive. I called it brave. I rose and walked to Harold's desk in the study, opening the top drawer where I kept the envelope I'd nearly given Guzman. The wax seal was still intact. I brought this to the wedding, I said, returning to the kitchen. It was meant for Guzman, but I didn't give it. I wasn't ready. Mia didn't reach for it. She just listened. Inside is a letter. And the first instruction. Instruction for what? For what happens when I'm gone. But also for what happens if I need to fight while I'm still here. She nodded slowly. Grandpa left everything in my hands, I said. And he gave me something more valuable than money. Power, she said, not cruelly. Control, I corrected. But I never wanted control. I wanted respect. And now? I smiled faintly. Now I want consequences. We sat in silence. Outside, a bird fluttered against the feeder. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower roared to life. It's time for a change, I said, the words surprising me even as I spoke them. Mia met my eyes. What kind of change? The kind that starts quietly and ends with no one laughing. She didn't look away. Tell me what to do. You're going to be my eyes, Mia, I said. You'll stay close to them. Let them think you're still part of the inner circle. Listen to what they say. Watch what they do. And when the time comes, I reached over and touched her wrist. I'll ask you one question. She nodded. I'll be ready. And for the first time since Harold died, I felt something stir in my chest. Not bitterness. Not grief. Something warm, like a match just struck in a dark room. Hope. The vineyard table was the kind of brunch venue where the food was plated like art and the servers wore aprons made of organic cotton. Mason jars filled with lavender and eucalyptus adorned every table, and the air smelled faintly of rosemary and mimosas. It was meant to feel elegant and effortless. But for me, it felt like the stage of a quiet ambush. I had barely touched my food. The rosemary potatoes were cold, the eggs too delicate to satisfy, and the company had begun to curdle. Roger and Pamela were seated directly across from me. Pamela had on her "I'm the perfect daughter in law" face, all honeyed smiles and performative laughter. Roger had already downed two Bloody Marys and was in his element, leaning back in his chair, legs crossed, grinning like the patriarch he desperately wanted to be. Callie, the new bride, flitted from table to table in a white sundress too pristine for anyone not trying to be photographed. Guzman trailed behind her, quieter today, distracted. Mia, seated diagonally to my left, kept giving me glances, small, urgent, the kind that said, "Brace yourself." And then came the clink. Callie stood up, her mimosa in hand, her voice bright as citrus. "Hi, everyone. If I can steal you away from these amazing eggs for just a second," she chirped, "I'd like to say a few quick thank yous." People quieted, some groaning playfully. A few held up glasses. First of all, she began, placing a manicured hand over her heart. "This weekend has been the most magical experience of my life. And it's all thanks to our family, friends, and, of course, the person who made it all possible." She turned toward me with a sugary smile. "Grandma Agatha." Applause broke out. A few people even hooped. I gave a small nod, my mouth twitching into a tight smile. I didn't trust it. "And we're beyond excited to say that," Callie continued. "Thanks to Grandma's incredible generosity, we'll be heading to Bali for our honeymoon." Laughter. Applause. Toasts clinked. 10 days. Kelly added, "All expenses paid." "Isn't she amazing?" Heads turned to me with admiration, expectation, even mild envy. I sat there frozen. Bali? I had never agreed to that. I hadn't even been asked. Across the table, Pamela smirked into her flute. Roger avoided my eyes, pretending to adjust his cuff. And Mia, dear Mia, looked stricken, ready to leap across the table and shield me. But I didn't need shielding. I needed to stand. So I did. I pushed my chair back slowly, letting the motion itself carry weight. The room quieted. Callie paused, glass still raised, smile wavering. "I need to correct something," I said, my voice calm but firm. All eyes turned to me. I did not offer to pay for the honeymoon. In fact, I was never asked. A hush fell, like the moment before a storm. "I'm terribly sorry if there's been a misunderstanding," I continued, "but I believe it's time I made a few things clear." I reached for my napkin and folded it with care before laying it neatly on the table. When I looked up, Roger's eyes had narrowed and Pamela had gone rigid. "For years," I said, "I've given what I could: money, time, advice, my home, my name. I gave in the hope that it was helping, in the belief that it was appreciated." I looked around the room, at the cousins who only called when they needed a down payment, at the friends of friends who had long accepted me as the family wallet, at Guzman, now watching me with widened eyes. "But what I gave has turned into something else," I said. "It's no longer generosity, it's expectation. Entitlement." I felt my voice strengthen as I spoke. "I've become the family's invisible investor, the background benefactor, the silent ATM." I turned to Kelly. "And now I find my name being used publicly, without my consent, to fund a honeymoon I didn't agree to?" Her mouth opened, but no words came. I looked to Roger and Pamela. No one thought to ask me, because no one thought I'd say no. They remained silent. Even Roger, for once. "I don't blame you for trying," I added. "You've been trained well. Every time I paid without protest, I taught you I could be manipulated. That lesson ends today." I scanned the table, letting the words hang. "I am not your bank card." Someone coughed. Someone else put down their mimosa. "I'm a person, a widow, a mother, a grandmother. I've lived through war, loss, childbirth, burying the man I loved, and now, apparently, the slow erasure of my worth outside my wallet. No one dared speak. I deserve to be asked. I deserve to be respected. And if that upends your brunch, your travel plans, or your image of me as the family purse, so be it. I picked up my handbag and adjusted my shawl. I hope you enjoy the rest of your meal. But I will not be paying for a honeymoon I never agreed to. I will not fund fantasy. I turned, my heels echoing against the polished wood floor. As I passed Mia, she gave me the smallest nod, pride flooding her expression. At the door, I paused. I didn't look back. Respect, like money, must be earned, I said over my shoulder. And then I left. My hands didn't tremble. My voice hadn't cracked. I didn't cry until I reached the garden outside and looked up at the sky Harold used to say was always just the right shade of indigo after a hard truth. And for the first time in years, I felt free. The sun had begun to slide behind the horizon when it happened. That golden, forgiving light that softens even the harshest edges of a long day stretched over the house, turning the hallway wallpaper to amber. The shadows on the floor looked like fingers reaching in from another time. Mia and I were sitting in the parlor. She was curled in the armchair, sketching absently in her notebook, something loose and abstract in watercolors. I had just lit the lamp beside me, the one with the yellow glass shade Harold brought back from New Orleans in 1982. We hadn't spoken much since brunch, but our silence wasn't strained. It was the kind that only exists between two people who understand one another without needing to fill the air. Then the doorbell rang. 3 quick jabs. Then again louder. I didn't have to ask who it was. I opened the door to find Guzman standing on the porch, his face flushed, his hands clenched into fists. He looked different than he had that morning. Something had cracked. The tie he'd worn to brunch was shoved into his pocket, his shirt half untucked, his hair rumpled. But it wasn't the dishevelment that struck me, it was the anger. It rolled off him like heat from a car hood in July. Guzman, I said softly. Can I come in? He asked. But it wasn't really a question. I stepped aside. Mia appeared in the hallway a moment later, instinctively moving closer to me. He didn't waste time. What the hell was that today? He snapped, storming into the living room. You'll have to be more specific, I said, walking in behind him with deliberate calm. The speech, he said, throwing his arms up. The drama. Publicly humiliating me and Callie? In front of her entire family. You mean when I clarified I wasn't funding your honeymoon? He scoffed, pacing. It made us look pathetic. You did that all on your own, Mia muttered from the doorway. His head whipped toward her. I wasn't talking to you. Well, I'm here, she said, stepping closer to my side. So you'll have to get used to it. He turned back to me. You embarrassed us, he said, voice rising. You made it seem like we were scheming. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to present a certain image to Callie's family? They're legacy people, Grandma. They come from wealth. And you thought lying about mine would impress them? It wasn't a lie, he exploded. It was an assumption. A safe one. You've never said no before. There it was. The sentence that curled in the air like smoke from a long-burning fire. You've never said no before. I took a deep breath. And that's the problem, isn't it? He stopped pacing. Excuse me. You counted on me being quiet, being grateful to be included. You thought I'd swallow the insult, smile for the photos, and hand over the check. He stared at me, breathing hard. You're blowing this out of proportion, he said. No, Mia cut in. You're just not used to hearing her say no. Guzman rounded on her. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me if you think manipulating Grandma is a family tradition I should inherit, she snapped. He looked stunned, as if the soft-spoken cousin he remembered had suddenly grown teeth. She's not your puppet, Mia continued. She's not your wallet. And she's not someone you can bully into submission. The silence that followed was volcanic. I can't believe this, he finally said. You're all turning on me. No, I said, my voice calm. We're just done pretending. He stared at me, and for a moment, I saw something shift. A flicker of the boy he used to be, struggling to understand how the world no longer bent to his comfort. But it faded fast, buried under layers of learned entitlement. This isn't over, he said darkly. I know, I replied. He took a step forward, and Mia moved in front of me instinctively. You'll regret this, he hissed. Cutting yourself off. Turning on your own family. I smiled, and the smile surprised even me. It wasn't cruel. It was just free. I used to worry I might, I said. But I don't anymore. I see everything clearly now. You've changed. No, I said. You have. His face twisted, whether in confusion or fury. I couldn't tell. You want me to beg? He spat. To apologize? You think that's what this is about? No, I said. I think you want me to feel afraid. Like I'll lose something if I don't give in. But the truth is, Guzman, I already did. I walked slowly to the hall table and picked up a framed photo of him at 12, smiling beside Harold, covered in paint from helping us redo the guest room. His cheeks round, his eyes kind. I lost this version of you, I said, holding up the frame. And I've been mourning him ever since. Something flickered across his face, but it was gone in an instant. Without another word, he turned and walked out. No slammed door this time, just the quiet click of it closing behind him. The silence that followed was deep, not peaceful, heavy. Mia sat beside me on the couch. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? For him. For how far he's fallen. I shook my head. He chose this. She nodded slowly, and we sat there as the room darkened with dusk. The last light of day caught on the rim of the teacup I hadn't finished. And for the first time, I knew, with certainty, that I would never go back to being silent. Morning light filtered through the lace curtains in delicate gold slots, catching the fine dust that danced in the air like pollen. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea I hadn't tasted. The house was quiet except for the occasional chirp outside the window and the low hum of the refrigerator, a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years, though it throbbed with a peculiar intensity now. The silence was no longer an emptiness. It was a space waiting to be filled with my choices, not theirs. Mia stirred her coffee beside me, barefoot, still in the oversized shirt she wore to sleep. She hadn't gone back to her apartment since the brunch. She didn't need to say why. Are you sure about seeing the lawyer today? She asked gently. I gave a single nod. It's time. I dressed in my navy blue dress, the one with Harold's favorite color, modest, stitched with pale cream embroidery. I paired it with a brooch he had given me on our 20th anniversary. A small emerald framed in gold, tucked just above my heart. The walk into Templeton and Mark's felt almost ceremonial. The smell of old wood, leather, and ink hit me like a memory. I hadn't been in that office since Harold's funeral, and the gravity of returning now for myself was not lost on me. Mr. Templeton stood as I entered. He looked older, but not weaker, his hands still steady, his eyes still sharp behind silver-rimmed glasses. Mrs. Moreau, he said with warmth. You're here alone? I'm not alone, I said with quiet certainty. I'm simply no longer surrounded by liars. He smiled knowingly and gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Let's begin, I said. For the next hour, I listened as the world I thought I understood peeled back to reveal something else entirely. Harold had been preparing. For years. He had shifted assets, invested in discrete portfolios, protected property under shell trusts I hadn't even known existed. By the end of it, the number sat on the page like a stone in my stomach. $6.92 million. He had built an empire in silence and placed it entirely in my hands. Why didn't he tell me all this? I asked, more to myself than Mr. Templeton. He knew you wouldn't want it, he replied. Not like this. Not as leverage. But he also knew, he paused, choosing his words carefully. He knew how your son and daughter-in-law spoke to you. He feared what they might become. He pulled out a yellowed page, tucked into the back of a manila folder. It was handwritten. I recognized the loops and flourishes immediately. Harold. If Agatha is ever disrespected, humiliated, or manipulated by any heir or spouse of an heir, she may, at her sole discretion, revoke their inheritance. All family benefits hinge upon respect, not blood. I sat back in the chair, my hand over my mouth. He protected me, I whispered. Mr. Templeton nodded. In every way he knew how. My voice came back slowly. Then I want to amend the will. Officially. I want Roger and Pamela disinherited. And I want to remove Guzman for the time being. For the time being? Yes. If he comes back to himself, if he returns with remorse, not entitlement, then I will decide. But it will be my decision, not his assumption. Templeton wrote it down. I also want to allocate $500,000 to a new beneficiary, I added. He raised his eyebrows. Name? Mia Lennox. He smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes. When I left the office, the sun had pushed through the morning mist. The air was crisp, and the light felt like something I could step into without shrinking. I didn't go home right away. I took Mia to Greenleaf Avenue, the storefront she'd once pointed out wistfully, a space with exposed brick and high ceilings, and a little yard in the back she dreamed of turning into a garden with string lights. She stood frozen as I handed her the key. I spoke to the owner, I said. Lease is in your name. The deposit's paid. You'll find a letter of credit inside and enough to get started. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the door. Inside, dust hung in the sunlight. The space smelled of age and wood and possibility. She turned to me, eyes shining. Why? Because you're the only one who's ever looked at me and seen something other than a wallet. She cried then, quietly, freely. And I let her. The next day, I enrolled in painting classes at the community center. Mia insisted on coming to the first one with me. We sat at easels under fluorescent lights, the side retirees and hobbyists. I painted a vase of poppies. Poorly. But it made me laugh, and when I laughed, the woman beside me, Geraldine, offered me her extra tube of paint and invited me for wine on Thursdays. I said yes. I also began to wake early again, not out of dread, but desire. I took morning walks, waved to neighbors, and started reading the classics I'd never had time for. I even found Harold's old telescope in the attic and set it up in the sunroom. I ignored the calls from Callie. Every day, the phone rang. Sometimes 4, sometimes 6 times. Then the texts began. Please call me. We didn't mean to upset you. Guzman says you've been misinformed. We need to talk about the trust. I blocked the number. Then came the letter. Heavy cream envelope, expensive stationery. My name written in careful, dramatic calligraphy. I didn't open it. I slid it into the drawer beside Harold's watch and cufflinks. It could wait. They all could wait. I had finally remembered who I was. And I was busy building a life that no longer included apologies. The air that morning was crisp with the scent of autumn apples and distant chimney smoke. The kind of air that made you feel like you were at the beginning of something fresh, something brave. My 66th birthday. And for the first time in years, I woke up not with a sigh, but with a purpose. Mia had insisted on hosting a gathering. Not a party, she said. A celebration. Of you. The difference, she explained, was that a party tried to impress others. A celebration honored truth. Her shop, freshly renovated and already humming with life, was the perfect setting. We spent the morning arranging wildflowers in old glass jars, no florist, no fuss. Just yellow cosmos, lavender, and late-blooming roses from Harold's garden. Mia tied each jar with a bit of frayed linen ribbon. Like little bow ties for dignity, she joked. The front windows were left open. A record player spun soft jazz. The air inside carried the scent of eucalyptus and lemon cake, baked by Mia herself after watching 3 YouTube tutorials and burning the first attempt. She was radiant, nervous, and proud, moving between tasks with the grace of someone doing something sacred. I wore my forest green wrap dress, long forgotten in the back of the closet. Mia had insisted it matched my eyes. I pinned Harold's emerald brooch at the collar. Before stepping out the door, I looked in the mirror. I didn't see someone clinging to the past anymore. I saw a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for surviving. The guests arrived slowly. Geraldine, of course, first, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors and bringing a bottle of red wine from her secret stash. She hugged me like we'd known each other a lifetime. George from painting class brought a watercolor sketch he'd done of me mid-laugh. It's not exact, he said, embarrassed, but it's joyful. 2 of Mia's friends, young women with ink-stained hands and unruly hair, showed up with hand-drawn cards and gentle admiration. We laughed. We sipped wine. We passed slices of lemon cake on mismatched plates. For once, every word spoken in the room felt free of agenda. There were no veiled requests, no questions about finances, no polite but loaded compliments. Then the door opened again. Roger, Pamela, Callie, and behind them, Guzman. They entered like royalty fallen from grace, stiff with performative warmth. They each carried gifts. Expensive, excessive, pointless. Pamela was the first to approach. Agatha, she said with two bright eyes. Happy birthday. You look like you've had some work done. I haven't, I replied, taking a box she thrust toward me. But I have done some unburdening. Roger gave a tight-lipped smile. Mom, the place is charming. Small, but charming. Callie made a show of complimenting the cake, though she didn't eat a single bite. And Guzman, he stayed near the corner, scanning the room with veiled hostility. Until you saw it. On the wall near the register hung a modest plaque. This gallery is made possible through the vision and generosity of Agatha Moreau. He went still. What is that? He asked. A plaque, Mia answered. I can read, Mia. She said nothing. He turned to me, voice low but sharp. You invested in her? I did, I said, sipping my wine. He stared. You disinherited me, and you gave your money to her? She's not a parasite, I said. She's an artist. She works. She listens. Roger stepped closer, alarm creeping into his voice. Mother, let's not get theatrical. You've always supported the family. What's this sudden obsession with boundaries? I offered. Pamela cut in. You're playing favorites. No, I said. I'm finally seeing clearly. Callie scoffed. You've been manipulated. I turned to her. Yes, for years. Just not by Mia. The room had gone quiet. Geraldine sipped her wine with glee. George looked like he was mentally sketching the scene. Guzman stepped forward. So what, you're cutting us off? You think that'll make you the hero of some late-life novel? I smiled. I'm not the hero. I'm the author. And I'm rewriting the ending. He laughed bitterly. You think this changes anything? It already has, Mia said. Pamela narrowed her eyes. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said. But I'll regret it on my terms. I turned away and raised my glass to the room. To reinvention, I said. To the quiet power of choosing your own story. Geraldine clapped. George stood. Guzman's face twisted. But he said nothing. They left soon after, the door shutting behind them like a punctuation mark. The rest of the evening unfurled like a ribbon. We danced. We shared stories. I blew out candles and didn't make a wish. I didn't need to. The wish had already begun coming true. The envelope came with an official seal and a sickly sense of déjà vu heavy, thick paper. Typed lines that aimed to bury something outrageous beneath a mask of civility. But the moment I opened it and saw the words petition for guardianship, my heart didn't drop. It flared. Filed by Guzman Moreau. Reason, concern for mental competence. Allegation, erratic behavior, suspicious financial decisions, vulnerability to manipulation. He had crossed the final threshold. The same boy who once wept in my arms after scraping his knee had now stood before a court of law and declared me incapable. Mia paced the kitchen when I told her. He's insane, she muttered. You're the sanest person in this whole damn family. It's not insanity, I said, folding the paper with care. It's greed, masked in concern. Can he win? She asked. No, I said flatly. Because Harold was smarter than all of them combined. Friday arrived with cold wind and low gray clouds. The courthouse stood solemn and aged, like an old god bearing witness to human pettiness. I wore a charcoal skirt suit, pearls Harold gave me when Roger was born, and shoes that didn't hurt my feet. I looked like a woman they wouldn't be able to ignore. Mr. Templeton met us in the marble hallway, carrying a brown leather briefcase that had surely outlived half his colleagues. Prepared, he asked. Overprepared. In the courtroom, they were already seated, Guzman and Callie at the front, flanked by a lawyer with a $3,000 haircut and a $30,000 ego. Roger and Pamela sat behind them, performing familial concern like seasoned actors. I wondered if any of them rehearsed their lines in the mirror. The judge entered. Court called to order. Guzman's lawyer stood, posture arrogant, voice full of carefully rehearsed alarm. Your Honor, we bring this petition with great reluctance, but also deep urgency. Mrs. Moreau has demonstrated patterns of instability, disinheriting long-standing heirs, transferring significant funds to non-relatives, including her granddaughter Mia Lennox, a known artist with no clear financial experience. He turned toward me, as if expecting I might flinch. I didn't. We seek limited guardianship, he continued, to protect Mrs. Moreau from undue influence and potential elder abuse. Our client, her grandson, has always had her best interests at heart. The words twisted like barbed wire. Thank you, counselor, the judge said. Mrs. Moreau? I stood, steady as a cathedral. Your Honor, I began. The only instability I've demonstrated recently is the willingness to finally say no. A murmur rippled through the gallery. For decades, I continued, I have supported my family financially, emotionally, and logistically. I paid mortgages, tuition, repairs. I hosted holidays, wrote checks, turned a blind eye. Not because I was weak, but because I was hopeful. I looked directly at Guzman. But hope is not the same as blindness. And kindness is not a blank check. Callie whispered something to him. He didn't move. My decisions have been deliberate. I invested in someone who has never lied to me. I corrected a will that no longer reflected who truly honored my name. That's not senility. That's clarity. I turned to the judge. I am not incompetent. I am not unwell. I am simply no longer willing to be silent. Mr. Templeton stood next. Quiet, sure, with the weight of decades behind him. Your Honor, I would like to submit an addendum to Mr. Harold Moreau's will, notarized and executed 3 years before his passing. He handed the document to the clerk, who passed it to the bench. The judge read, in the event that any heir shall publicly humiliate, undermine, or attempt to control my wife, Agatha Moreau, through legal coercion, falsehood, or manipulation, such heir shall be permanently and irrevocably removed from all inheritance and trust-related claims. The courtroom froze. It was a silence that screamed. Pamela gasped. Roger paled. Callie clutched her purse like it might save her. Guzman blinked once, twice, then turned red with something more than embarrassment. Rage? Fear? This clause, Mr. Templeton continued, was added with full understanding of Mrs. Moreau's lifelong pattern of generosity and Mr. Moreau's desire to ensure that generosity was never abused. The clause is binding, and in light of this guardianship attempt, it is also triggered. The judge looked at Guzman. Mr. Moreau, are you aware of the implications of this clause? He stammered. I was worried about her. The judge raised an eyebrow. Were you? Or were you worried about the funds being redirected away from you? Guzman said nothing. I find no basis for the claim of incompetency, the judge said, and I consider the clause in Mr. Moreau's will to be legally valid and now enforceable. Petition denied. The gavel struck once. Final. Cold. Glorious. It was over. As we stood to leave, Guzman rose shakily, his voice desperate now. Grandma, we can talk, no, I said, turning to him. You've mistaken my love for weakness. And now you've taught me something I should have learned long ago. I turned to the others. I don't need to be loved by people who despise my boundaries. I don't need to be protected from the life I built. I walked past them all, out the courthouse doors, into the wind. The air was sharp, clean, real. Mia caught up to me and squeezed my hand. Are you okay? I'm better, I said. For the first time in decades, I am no longer someone else's hostage. It was nearly a year to the day since the hearing. The morning sun filtered through the bookstore windows, soft and golden, catching on the dust motes like confetti in celebration. The air smelled of cedarwood shelves, new paper, and the faint trace of cinnamon scones from the bakery next door. Mia stood behind the counter, arranging a bouquet of marigolds into a chipped teapot vase. Her bookstore, the quiet page, had become something of a local sanctuary. There were shelves arranged by mood, not genre. A reading nook with velvet cushions. A ladder that Mia refused to replace, even though it creaked with character. She looked up as I entered, a canvas tote slung over my shoulder, a paintbrush poking out like a flag of freedom. There she is, Mia said, grinning. How is the class? I pulled out a postcard of a vineyard I'd painted in Tuscany, loose strokes, bold color, imperfect as a heartbeat. They said it looked like freedom, I replied. Because it is, she said, pinning it to the corkboard behind the counter, the one labeled Grandma's Gallery. After the courtroom battle, I had poured myself into painting, into traveling, into the spaces I'd once left vacant to make room for everyone else's needs. I had seen Prague's bridges at dawn, watched a thunderstorm roll over the Irish coast, and danced barefoot in the vineyards of a Catalonian village with women who had also once been wives, mothers, and forgotten. But this bookstore, this place of soft light and quiet joy, felt more like home than any villa. I'm reading today, I said. Mia winked. Your group's already assembling. The bell above the door jingled, and a parade of small feet entered, children in rain boots and tangled hair, some with crayon on their cheeks, others dragging beloved stuffed animals. They squealed when they saw me. Miss Agatha. They ran toward me, arms wide. I crouched, hugging them all. Storytime had become a fixture in the shop. Every Saturday morning at 10, I read fairy tales, folklore, fables. But I always added something at the end, a reminder that kindness didn't mean silence and bravery wasn't always loud. Mia brought out a tray of juice boxes and cookies. The kids flopped onto cushions and beanbags. I sat in my rocker and opened a copy of The Paper Garden. Today's story was about a girl who grew a garden in a land where everyone else built fences. She watered it with her tears, fed it with her memories. And when it bloomed wild and uncontrollable, no one could take it from her again. They listened wide-eyed. After, one of them, little Janie, asked, "Is it real?" I smiled. "It is if you want it to be." When the session ended, I returned to the back of the store where Mia had cleared a space for my easel. I began sketching a new painting, a girl planting seeds, her shadow shaped like wings. As I worked, Geraldine popped in wearing a wide-brimmed hat and holding a jar of fig preserves. Brunch tomorrow? Wouldn't miss it. Outside, the wind carried the scent of blooming jasmine. The sun warmed my face through the open window. I had not spoken to Roger or Pamela since the trial. Guzman had sent a single letter months ago, apologetic but cautious. I had replied, not unkindly, but with firm lines. I told him I wished him peace, but I would no longer compromise mine to earn his. Mia flourished. Her store thrived. She gave talks at the local art school and held book clubs that discussed both prose and poetry, tears and truth. I had just turned 67. I traveled often, painted with joy, read with love, and lived with no more waiting for permission. Every evening, I walked through Harold's old garden, now my garden, where Mia and I had planted new roses. The old bench still sat beneath the maple tree, worn smooth by time. I sat there often, with a book or just my thoughts, listening to the wind tell me stories. I wasn't just free. I was home.